Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another session of our Azure Study series. I hope you guys are having a wonderful weekend. It's been a lovely day out here, nice and sunny, and I hope you guys enjoyed yesterday football match. It's a lovely game. So to be fair, it was unfortunate that the scoreline was 0-0, but here we are. So once again, thank you for taking your time to join this session. So today we're going to talk about storage. It was meant to be Azure DevOps, but unfortunately we had a bit of like a hiccup. So changed the topic to Azure Storage. So it's still going to be action pack. We have Promise going to deliver this topic. So definitely it's going to be action packed. So Promise, thank you for joining this session. All right.
Hello, hello. How are you doing?
Yeah, I can't complain. It's nice and sunny out here. How about you? How are you? How's the weather at your location?
Honestly, it's been quite hot lately, like really, really hot. But what we're trying to do is just manage the weather. Lagos has been of a bit on the high side, but we are hoping that it rains soon, and then the weather is a bit calm and everywhere is cool.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, here last week was quite kind of like a cold, but
Okay.
lucky enough, there's a bit of sun. I mean, when the sun comes out,
Oh,
we tend to enjoy it. Enjoy it. So,
oh,
what do you have
that's
in store for
nice.
us for today?
Okay, for today, I actually do have something interesting. I'm going to be talking on, Azure Storage, how you're going to be configuring Azure Storage, understanding some terms used when talking with Azure Storage. And hopefully, this gives us an insight onto what we need to do to be able to, work with Azure Storage. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I believe our audience are also looking forward to this session as well. So for the
Yeah.
audience, make sure if this is the first time you're joining the session, make sure you share this video with your friends. More likely, they might be interested in Azure as well, and subscribe to the channel. And if you're not part of our meetup group, this is a clear opportunity for you to do so because we are bringing a lot of topics relating to Azure in the coming weeks. So do well to join our community as well. So over to you, Promise.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. If you could help me share my screen, that would be lovely. Yes,
You know,
yes, yes. That's great. Cool. All right. So, like I said, today we will be talking on Azure Storage, learning how to configure Azure Storage, and then we want to be able to understand some important things on Azure, right? So, this is the beautiful thing we are going to be doing. Just a minute, please. All right. Sorry about that. I just had to turn on the lights out. Yeah. Okay. So we will be progressing on this to talk more on implementing Azure Storage. So I'm sure some of you must have heard about what Azure Storage is all about, but probably you're wondering, how does this affect me and how do I make good use of this service? Well, one wonderful thing you can do with Azure Storage is being able to know when or how to configure it to work with your applications in order to, let me say, minimize costs, right? And at the same time, get premium performance, right? So those are some of the key features we'll be looking at, and hopefully we'll get that resolved today. Yeah. All right. So just like it says here, a service that you can use to store files, messages, table, and other type of information. So Azure Storage itself is, I would say, it's like it's a service itself that has different layers that you're able to make use of storing various things, right? Now you can see it says it captions it into three: durable, secure, right? And then you say storage for virtual machines containing unstructured data and structured data. And then you have two tiers: the premium and then the standard. Now, one of the things you should know, right? I remember way back as at 4 to 5 years ago when I was still on the operations part of Azure end, right? At the time, I would say that the storage wasn't managed as at then. So at that time, we had to make a whole lot of making use of blobs, to be able to power our virtual machines, right? And a lot of unstructured things were there and really not managed. But the beautiful thing with Azure is that now Azure has brought about the managed services. So rather than making use of your blobs to power your virtual machines, right, this time around you make use of your managed disk, right? Your managed disk. Okay, so just as I explained, in these three tiers, you have the various functions which the Azure storage is able to operate on. All right, we'll be moving ahead. Now, one of the things you really want to know about when you're talking about Azure storage services are about, I would call them, few technical points, right? This these points are like, I would say they are services that are used in your storage account. One of the services we always use whenever you're making use of Azure storage service is your Azure containers. Now, how do I explain containers? Containers are like your folders, right? When you go to your system and then you open your system and you want to separate a group of documents, so therefore you make use of a folder. This time around in your Azure storage, what you do is you make use of containers. Now, these containers could be to keep things like your blobs. It could be things like your videos, your files, right? It's just like a container you use to segregate different kind of data you want to have on your Azure storage. Right. So the next thing to look at is your Azure tables. So those of you who are into database and you're storing things like, let's say, structured and unstructured data, relational data, and all of that, you could make use of your Azure tables to do that. The next thing you want to look at is Azure queues. Now, like I explained to you, these are services under the Azure storage service, right? Now, if you those who practically configure informations, you would always make use of your Azure queues, right? To be able to store maybe some messages. Okay, take for instance, your application is supposed to be sending some kind of messages to the customers by default, right? You want to be able to configure your Azure queues to be able to serve as a buffer for this application messaging, right? Now, the next feature you want to look at is called the Azure files. Now, I can remember clearly that there has been a lot of progress in Azure files. I mean, a whole lot of progress. Way back about 5 years ago, I could remember that what we just had then was just the files. And there was a limitation on the amount of files you could store on your Azure files. And at that time, we had a lot of customers always coming back and saying, "Oh, is it possible to be able to increase the size? We want to be able to use like Azure files as a medium where we can share files across the company, across the organization." And then I'm sure this probably went onto the Azure team, and they were like, "How about we do something about this?" Right? And then they then increased the size for the Azure files. If I am not mistaken, I think we can have up to about 4 to 5 terabytes for Azure files right now. I know a lot of changes have been happening, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than that now. Okay, so taking a look at your resource group where you have your storage account, you would see all of these services we've talked about here, or all of these features, right? So on my screen, you can see here we have the containers, the tables, the queue, the files. And under the containers, we have things like the blobs. Under the tables, we have entities. Under queue, we have messages. And under files, we have directories. Now, if you look at the last column here, this talks about the sample data that could be added into any of these features, right? So you can see, for instance, for your Azure blobs, you can store things like images, documents, video, audio files. You could also store big data backup files and your database logs, right? So those are sample things, or let me say examples of things you could store in your blob under the containers. All right, we'll be moving ahead. Now, okay, so some of you may be wondering, right? Storage account, are there different kinds of storage accounts? What is the difference between these different kinds of storage accounts? So, yeah, there are different storage accounts based on their functions, right? So here, one of the things we have is the standard general purpose V2. Now, the reason why it is called the standard general purpose is because this is probably like what almost everyone uses for like almost everything. But because it's so common, because it's standard, people don't know that there are other types, right? People don't know that there are other types. The reason is because it is just standard, right? So you see, for the standard general purpose V2, you could have things like your blob, your file, your queue, your table, data lake storage. Now, the ones that are really not common are the premium block blobs, the premium file shares, and the premium page blobs. Now, let me tell you, anytime you hear the word premium in Azure, man, you know that you're dealing with high performance and cost, right? High performance and cost. So making use of these services, I would say, is not really for those who are trying to manage things, right? Premium is basically for those or organizations who need, high capability. They need to be able to work with high speed, right? And ensure they have like probably high throughput, high IOPS values, in to be able to carry out the activities within the organizations. So taking a look at premium block blobs, you can see these are block blob scenarios with high transaction rates. So it's not what you use for your regular kind of activity, right? This is what you use when you need high transaction rates. And you can see here it says for scenarios that use smaller objects or require consistently low storage latency. So just the same way you have latencies on your network, you also have latencies on storage, especially if you are not using the right kind of storage account to support the service you're running. So if you want to ensure that you have a very low latency, what you should be considering is a premium block blob, right? Now, let's move over to the premium file shares. The premium file shares, they are for enterprise organizations. One, they have high performance and also are used for sharing between applications. So I already mentioned this before we even started, and I told you that anytime you hear the word premium, you are looking at really high performance, right? And in this case, you are looking at maybe enterprise organizations. So generally, I wouldn't expect startups who aren't so boxed up to make use of this kind of service. Why? Because I feel like it is cost intensive, yeah, but it delivers the high performance. So you know how when you want a particular feature, what you want to do is, okay, yes, for me to get this, I need to spend more. That's what this service is here for. Azure knows that, well, if you need this premium service, you can actually get it, but it comes with a cost, right? So that is something to take note of. The next one is the premium page blobs. This is also for premium high performance and page blob scenarios. All right, we'll be proceeding. Now, I'm about to talk of a feature in the Azure Storage account that helps for consistency of data, right? And what this feature is called replication strategies. Now, please, there's one thing I always try to explain to people. Do not confuse replication strategies for backup. No, they are not backup. Actually, these are meant to ensure that whenever you request your data, you get them. So Azure wants a scenario where you call for your data from this region. Let's say I will take, for instance, Lagos, Nigeria. Your data is available for you. When you go to the northern part of Nigeria, right, to call for that same data is available for you. How Azure is able to make do or ensure of this availability is what is called the replication strategies. Now we have various kind of replication strategies depending on what you feel it's okay for you and what you can afford, right? Um, some of the replication strategies are the LRS, right? The ZRS. So let me actually mention the full names. Let me not just give them by the short names, right? So the LRS is the local redundant storage. The ZRS is the zonal redundant storage. The GRS is the geo redundant storage, and also the RAGRS is the read access redundant storage. Now, like I said, do not confuse this service for backup. It's actually not to back up your data, but to ensure high availability of your data. So there's a difference between when your data is available, right, and when you're backing up. When you're backing up is you want the same kind of data stored somewhere else. That's when you're backing up. But in this case, you are not backing up, but you are actually making use of this service so that your data is highly available. Now, what does it mean when you talk about the local redundant storage, right? What does that mean, right? So it means that one, you have three replicas of that particular um, storage or that particular file you have in one region, right? So for the local redundant storage, you have three replications of the same file in one region. So they could be in okay, let me take for instance, if the region is in Lagos, it could be in like the mainland, the island, and in some other remote part of Lagos. So those are like having three replicas of your data in that region, right? You also protect against disk node rack failure. So you might be wondering, why are we actually doing this, right? So now take a look at this, right? It's possible that if you don't have any of these replication strategies turned on, it's possible like where you currently staying or the location you currently staying, there could be power failure in that place, right? And what happens to the data being stored in that place? That means that at the time you may be calling for that data when there's a power failure, you would not be able to retrieve that data, right? Now, to be able to protect against things like this, Azure brought about this service so that yes, it's the same file but being stored in three separate locations so that whenever you are calling that file, it's going to be available for you. So that means if one data center decides to go down, it doesn't mean your file is down. That's the beautiful thing about this. Right. The next one to look at, right, is the ZRS, which is the zonal redundant storage. Now, this is the same thing with, but this time around, it has three replicas in three different zones. Three replicas in three different zones in one region, right? So, yes, you're dealing with one region, but three different zones, meaning that, let's say there's a power outage. You don't expect that the power outage would go out on the three different regions at the same, or the three different zones at the same time, right? So thereby you actually giving that kind of data or service you're running a very, very high availability, right? This also protects against disk node, rack, and zone failures, right? And also you have synchronous writes to all three zones. That means you can be writing at the same time to all of the three zones. Now, the next one we're looking at is the GRS, which is the geo-regional storage, right? Geo-redundant storage. This time around, this has what? Six replicas, two different region, three per region, right? Now, you remember for the zones, we talked about three zones. This time around, you're having two regions, not one, two. So, for instance, I could give you an example. This is the same thing as saying storing your data in East US and East US 2. Those are two different regions, right? If you're familiar with Azure, you will know that these are actually two different regions, right? Or when you say West US and West US 2, right? So these are storing your data in two different regions and having what? Six replicas, three per region. So here you are protecting against major regional disasters, asynchronous copy to what? To the secondary storage, right? So that means that, for instance, I'm just taking a wild guess. For instance, like the power is out in the whole country, in the whole region, like the whole region, let's say the whole of East US, right? Let's say the power is out, which affected all the data centers in East US. When you have your geo redundant storage configured, your data would automatically be transferred from the secondary zone, the secondary copy, which is in another region, would automatically be converted to the primary copy. So therefore, the secondary zone will then be filling, or will be giving you, or giving insights, or fetching you that data that you have stored, right? So remember, in this particular scenario, one region is down. Let's say that country is down, right? Now, the way this is being configured is that immediately that region or that zone or that region goes down, the second region kicks up, right, and starts serving that data. So let me say you have like a website running on all of that. Your customers would not even know that there was a blackout in like the whole region. No one would know, because the secondary region automatically picks up and becomes the primary region. Right. The next one we're talking about is the RAGRS. And I'm sure you're wondering, what is the difference between the GRS and the RAGRS? So the difference basically is that you now have read access to your secondary data. You have a read access to your secondary data, which you don't have when you're making use of just the GRS, right? So you can see here, it has a separate secondary endpoint, and then recovery point objective delay to the secondary can be queued, right? So you can actually be able to read what is on your secondary endpoint. All right, we'll progress with this, right? The next one we want to talk about is the word Josona redundant storage, right? This Josona redundant storage has six replicas, three plus one zones, and what? Two regions. Right. Same thing it does. It protects against disk, node rack, zone, and region failure. Why? Because you're dealing with what? Two regions this time around. You also have synchronous write to all three zones and asynchronous copy to the secondary, right? The next one we're going to be looking at is what the read access Josona redundant storage. Yeah. I know. It's like, oh, you're having the Josona redundant storage. Now you're having a read access to the redundant storage. And you're wondering, why am I having all of this? Well, the difference basically is that this time around you have read access to your secondary for the Josonal redundant storage. Same thing, you have a separate secondary endpoint and there's an RPO delay to secondary. And then the RPO delay to secondary can be queried, meaning that you can query the data at the other secondary endpoint, right? So that's one of the beautiful things about this. All right. Looking at asset storage, basically, a lot of people, I see a lot of people come to meet me and they're like, oh, how do you actually access these services? Right? How do you access the services? The thing is, when you have any data stored in your storage account, with the right key, you can actually access those data. So let me show you what I mean. Just a minute. Let me pop up my browser and show you an example on what I mean. Yeah. So this time around, I will be going to portal.azure.com. All right. So I'll just be heading to my storage account. Let me take, for instance, this is one of my storage accounts which I have, and let me see if I have something stored in here. Yeah, so this is what I have here, right? I have this here. Now, if you remember clearly, what we were talking of was how do you access these services, right? Can you access them over the web? Is it possible to access these services over the web, right? And you can see, right? You can see, right, that you have the container services, the table services here, the queue services, and the file service. But take, for instance, that we have a file in our container. How are you able to access this file outside of the storage account? So one of the things you can do in this case is this. This is a sample script which I configured, right? And I stored in this container, right? And just for instance, I want someone located in some region to be able to have access to this file using my Azure Storage account. What do I do? How do I make it available for this person? One of the things I can do is that I give the person the link to this file. So if you see here, you can see there is the link to the file. You see it says something like what? Generate SARS. So what this generate SARS is going to do is that it's going to generate a key for me that I'm going to use to be able to access this file. So take, for instance, I can say I want this key, right, to be available for, let's say, an hour. So I could come here, you can see the date, right? And you can see the time. This time is currently 3:31 p.m. West African time. Let's say I want this key to be available for just an hour, right? So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say this 3, okay, let me make it 4:31 p.m. So that means that anybody can be able to access this file under 1 hour, right? So what I'm going to do is just generate the SAS key, right? So meaning that someone could come here, click on this, and they should be able to access this over the browser. Wow, can you see this? Can you see this? So that means that you could actually share the file itself to a person, right? And then minimize the access, like control the access. Let's say you want them to just view that file for 1 hour. You really don't need to stress yourself. Just drop it in your container in Azure and set the permissioning you want. What access do you want to give them? If you remember here, right, one of the access I gave them was the read permission. But not just that, there are other permissions you can give them, which is what? Permanent delete, right? Or delete the write, the create, the add. So once you set the permission, you can then say, oh, stored access policy. Well, if you have any, you could make use of it. But in my case, I don't have any, right? You can as well make use of rotational keys. That's you can have like up to 2 keys, right? You rotate them how you please, right? So this is one of the beautiful functions in Azure. Now you have to be really really careful with this, right? You really have to be careful with it because anyone you give your SaaS token, right? Anyone you give your SaaS token can actually have access to those files. So if you know that you don't want anybody viewing your files, you need to be careful with your SaaS token. All right. So what I'm going to do at this point is I would probably just disable this key, the key created, right? I'm just going to disable it so that it's not going to be accessible by anyone.
I promise. Before you
Yeah.
move on, I have a few questions around
All
where you
right.
are at the moment. So I just want to bring it up so that
All
we
right.
can just give answers to that. So Chris says, like you just said, Azure Storage support failover to geo redundant storage. Why should customers still perform backups using any of the available backups tools for high availability, like Azure backups or Vim backup?
Okay. Thank you very much for this question, Chris. Like I said, having this service is Azure's way of making your data available. This is not a backup. I keep repeating this. This is not a backup. This is in no way to be compared to a backup because it's not. This is Azure trying to make your service available for you. So maybe I should give it a better explanation, right? So what I mean is this: you paid Azure some certain amount of money, right, as your subscription, and you told Azure, right, that oh, you guys signed an agreement, and Azure probably gave you some SLAs to be met, right? Now, Azure wants to ensure it always meets that SLA. So what it does is that it makes sure in its own parts, right, that your data is available for you anytime you need it. Now, one of the things Azure had to do to ensure that that data will be available for you anytime you need it is by making use of things like your redundant strategies. This is Azure's way. They are not saying they are backing it up for you. No, they are not backing it up for you. They are only trying to meet the SLA they promised you. So please do not confuse these features for backup. Backup itself is a different thing. It's like having a total separate copy of your data in some other stored places wherever you define. But this is Azure bringing in this feature to ensure that they meet up with that SLA they promised you. So yes, they are not backing up your data, but they are making your data highly available for you. Like I told you, there's a difference between highly available and backup, right? So it's possible, right, that there is an issue from your end, not from Azure's end. So if the issue is from your end, fine. But on Azure's end, Azure don't want to, they want to ensure that there's no issue on their end. So they had to make sure that they provide services that will ensure that that data is available for you when you need it. I
All
hope I
right.
was able to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I've got
All
another
right.
one follow up from Michael.
All right.
Michael, I want you to throw more emphasis on the difference between, let's say, I mean, you mentioned, let's say, the storing the data locally into a specific data center, the zone and the region. We want you to bring more emphasis on that one to make people have more clarity. And when we talk about data center, zone, and also the region.
All right. Okay. So your data centers, right? They remain your data centers, right? So that's standard. In fact, Azure has data centers almost in so many regions, right? So look at your data center as the basic infrastructure end, right? Now, when we talk about zones, it's like having your data center not just in one location but in various zones. So in your zones you still have the data centers, right? This time around it's like you are expanding the amount of data centers you have so as to provide higher availability. So just like I said, for your locally redundant storage, you could have like in your data center that could be storing your data, 3 copies of your data in that data center, in one region, in one zone. But when you talk about zone now, you're talking about either 2 or 3 more zones. Yes, in those zones you still have data centers, and then your data is stored in 2 or 3 of those zones. Still the same thing to provide you with high availability. I hope I was able to answer that question correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, so if that answer your question, you can drop a message in the chat as well. All right, thank you for
Yeah.
that. That's all the question we have now.
All right. Also, if you have your questions, please reach out to us. We have like a handle. Join our LinkedIn group. I mean, we're always willing to provide answers to questions and help guide as much as we can. So I think our moderator here will be helping us with some of those handles for the group so that you can always join and then follow up with the services and the activities that we are doing or providing on this group. All right, I'll be proceeding with the training. Now, I'll be moving on to securing your storage endpoint. And you may be wondering, what does it mean by securing your storage endpoint? Well, just like the same thing, you secure your data, you need to also secure your storage endpoint. How do you secure your storage endpoint? So, you could actually decide and say, oh, I want only this IP address to be able to access this storage endpoint. And that's the beautiful thing about Azure. Azure has made that to be possible. So let me show you a live scenario of what I'm talking about. This is my storage account, right? I go into this storage account and then I want to secure this. I come over to networking, right? You can see here security plus networking. Now, if you take a look at this, it says allow access from one. What is ticked is this all networks. What this means is that any network should be able to reach the storage account. Yeah, so they should be able to reach the storage account does not mean they can access it. So this is like providing layers of security on your storage account. So, like I said, this storage account is open to all network. Doesn't mean that anybody can come from any network and access this storage account. No, they still need to provide some form of authentication. But just take for instance, I don't want to give a chance. I don't want to give a chance to anyone who is trying to play some funny pranks by probably, doing running some funny commands and all of that. I could decide that I don't even want all networks to be able to have access to this storage account. I want to restrict what IP or what virtual network or what public interface can have, right, this access to this storage account. So here you can see I can add an existing virtual network, I can add a new virtual network, or I can add a range of IPs. That means like on-prem IPs that should have access to this. Now, if for instance, take for instance, that I decide to pick this option, right, and I don't add my IP address here, at the moment I click on this save button, I have lost access to this storage account. I have lost access to this storage account. The reason is because I didn't put my IP here. So therefore, I'm saying that no IP should have access to this. Now, for you to be able to undo this action on this storage account, you may need to raise a support request to Microsoft to be able to do that. So, therefore, you have to be careful what you're doing. You know, the popular saying in the Linux interface, when you are being given access to the root password, it says, to whom much is given, to that same person much is expected from that person, right? So once you are managing your company's Azure Storage account, you need to be careful that you understand what you're doing so as not to lock yourself out from that service. I hope that is clear. So I'll be going back to our training now. All right. So I just explained to you how it is possible to restrict access to a storage account, right? So we've just seen that in action. Now, another thing we'll be looking at here is a I will call it a short demonstration on how to create a storage account, right? And I think probably we'll be stopping the series here. So just so that those of you who are like, oh, how do you even create a storage account? You are able and aware on how to do that. All right, so this is just a sample demo on how you can create a storage account. The first things first is this, right? Once you log into your Azure portal, what you need to do is come here and search for what? Storage account. And once you do this, you are able to click on this. Now, you can see this create button here is used to be able to create a new storage account. So I'm going to proceed to click on the create button, right? I'm going to proceed to click on the create button, right? So the next thing I need to do is to select what? Select the subscription I have, right? And probably choose a default resource group. And then I click on next, which is advanced. I can actually leave all of this in the default state, which they are, right? The next thing I do is to click on networking, right? I can actually leave this on default. The next thing I do is data protection. In this case, if you want to enable soft delete. So I remember way back 4 to 5 years ago when I started my journey in Azure, this feature wasn't available. The reason this feature wasn't available was maybe at the time they had not really thought about it in that sense. But customers came about and they were saying a lot of things like, "Oh, we need help." Like so sometimes a customer who really doesn't know how to operate the environment but mistakenly deletes his blob. And let's say that blob is a very very important blob, it has so many information, and they're like, oh man, my boss is going to fire me, I've deleted some very very important files, some very very important documents, and they're like, oh, who is going to help me? So the next thing they do, they go out to raise a ticket to Microsoft, right? And Microsoft, or from the back end team, there's this rule that You don't promise them that that data can be recovered. We don't promise customers that, because it may not be recovered. What we're going to do is to try our possible best to help you recover the data, so that if it is not recovered, you will not come and say, oh, Microsoft did not help me recover my data. They had already told you that we are not promising you anything. So when started becoming a regular thing, a lot of customers were coming, oh, Microsoft, help me to recover my data. I mistakenly deleted my blob, all of this. Microsoft decided to come about this feature called soft delete, which is like whenever you delete anything mistakenly, if you've enabled this feature before then, it goes like into a recycle bin, meaning that it will be in that recycle bin for some certain amount of days which you would have pre-configured. So in this case, soft delete for blobs is 7 days, meaning that if you delete the blob, it will be available for you to restore it back in 7 days. After 7 days, it will be permanently deleted, right? So this feature itself solved a lot of customers' problems, and they were no longer raising tickets like they should, or like they were usually doing. Why? Because even if they mistakenly delete their data, because they've enabled soft delete, they can be able to still have access to bring back those data they deleted. All right, the next thing is on encryption, right? So you can make use of the default encryptions provided by Azure. The next thing is your tags. It's always good to tag your resources. Tag your resources so that you will know who is making use of these resources or who is eating more money in your organization. So take for instance, you're wondering what the finance guys are doing, and you see that the bills they keep getting bigger, bigger and bigger. What you can do is to create a policy to ensure that any resource being created is always tagged, and it should be tagged by the department. So if all resources created are tagged by the department, you can now be able to narrow down who is actually spending more on your subscription. Well, for this configuration, we will leave that for another class. Anyway, let's proceed. So you can see here the validation failed because I had not picked some of the necessary things I needed to pick. So once you are done with all of this, all you need to do is just come here and click on what? Review plus create. And then your storage account will be created. All right, so that was like a short demo on how to create your storage account. Let's move on. Right. Okay. So here on, I will just be looking at comparing files to blobs, right? What are Azure files? What are Azure blobs, right? So you can see here, Azure files are SMB interface, client libraries, and a REST interface that allows access from anywhere to what? To stored data. When do you make use of Azure files? When you want to lift and shift an application to the cloud, store shared data across multiple virtual machines, store development and debugging tools that need to be accessed from many virtual machines. When do you use Azure Blobs, and what are Azure Blobs? Azure Blobs are basically client libraries and REST interface that allow what? Unstructured data, flat namespace to be stored and accessed at a massive scale in block blobs. So you might be wondering, when do you make use of this Azure blobs? You make use of them to support streaming and random access scenario. Also, access application data from anywhere. Right. Let's proceed on this. Now, managing file share. Managing file share, right, is just all about um, how do you configure access to your file share. So depending on the environment you're making use of, Azure has done an automatic configuration for you so that you can be able to mount these file shares and have them available in your local operating system for you, right? So what Azure did was they looked at what were the necessary things that are needed for your for your file, for you to be able to mount your file share in any environment. And then they thought, oh, what is necessary is what? Having port 445 open. If you're making use of the Linux operating system, you can mount the drive, or a Mac operating system, you can mount it. So far, you have what the SMB what 3.0 encryption. So I'm just going to show you a sample of this, and we'll just end the class here. So what do I mean, right? I go to my storage account, right? And I go to files. Let me pick one of the storage accounts. I go to my file share. Now, I already created a file share of what? 40 gigabytes, right? Now, take for instance, I want to be able to mount this file share on my system, so that, right, anytime I need the file share, I can have access to it, right? One of the things I can do is click on what this connect button. Once I click on the connect button, it shows me, it creates like a default command, right, that has been stored there that I can run. So once I just copy this command on my Windows system and run this command on like the CMD or the PowerShell, right, I should be able to have access to this file share on my local OS. Now, but take for instance, I'm not making use of Windows. In my case, I'm making use of a Mac operating system. All I need to do is to select this tab called Mac OS, and then I run this command. So I could open a terminal, right, and run this command. Once I do that, I would have access to this file share on my local OS. So um, when doing this, you have to take note of the following things. And one of the things you need to take note is this: the TCP port 445 needs to be open for this command to work. So that means that on your network or whatever is providing some form of connection between your virtual machine and Azure, you need to ensure that your port 445 is open on that network, right? It says your organization or internet service provider may block port 445. Please work with your organization or ISP to open port 445. So this port 445 is very essential if you want to be able to have access to this file share on your local operating system. So, like I said, at this time, we'll be ending the class. Now, does anyone have any question for me? Does anyone have any question for me?
All right, yeah. So far, nothing in yet. So yeah, probably.
All right.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful session. It's been very, very, very informative, and also the practical aspect was really good, nice and easy to follow through. I learned few
Thank you
tricks,
very
and
much.
also few got you, like the firewall
Yeah.
one as well, because the firewall one is easy for you to just overlook, and then
Yeah, it's very
in a
easy to
natural way.
value. In fact, I remember like while I worked back with the operations team then with Microsoft, I remember always having some scenarios where some customers reach out to me and say, I've been locked out of my storage account. I no longer have access. Please help me. And one of the things these customers do is that they are looking for immediate help. Like,
Exactly.
and they are just hoping that with the knowledge you have, you should be able to provide assistance to them. So one of the things we do is not just train them about the product, but provide them with the knowledge they need to
Yeah,
be able to manage it themselves. So
absolutely.
imagine after this customer has experienced this scenario, and then when they raise a ticket, they are now being trained. Okay, next time you have this issue, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. So you see that Azure is, or Microsoft is not just providing the service to the customers, but is also educating the customers on how to make use of these services. And I think that is a very, very key thing if you want your service to go far and wide. And because Microsoft and Azure, right, they value this product so much, they are doing a lot to ensure that it's very easy for their customers and their clients to be able to make use of this service.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, with these kind of things, when you look at Microsoft, the documentation that they provide is just a lot. Even when you
top
go to the
notch.
portal, you easily have
Yeah,
access to this documentation as well to understand what exactly is going on if you have certain issues. Right. So,
yeah,
so far, no questions yet, aside
yeah,
from
yeah,
the ones earlier.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
probably you can wait probably another minute and see if nothing. Then we
Well, while we wait for the questions to pop up, right? One of the things I want to let you know is that this community is existing to change lives, right? One
can.
of the things we want to do is that we we have a goal to educate people on Azure, right? We have a goal to make you know that Azure is providing these wonderful services, and you can make use of these services for your businesses, for organizations you run. When you have the right amount of knowledge, right, you will be maximizing this service. Like, I make use of Azure on a daily, and I know the benefits it's giving to me. So this team, the Microsoft Nigeria team,
Yeah,
right, what we're trying to do is to educate the public on what wonders Azure can perform. So please always feel free to reach out to any of the organizers, like one of my organs here, Sakofi, right? We also
absolutely.
have some wonderful leaders in the team. Don't hesitate to reach out. If you have any misunderstandings of on any service Azure provides, please ensure to reach out, and one of us will be able to provide guidelines for you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And make sure to tune in every weekend because we are constantly bringing these studies. So if this is the first time you're joining, do subscribe and also stay tuned for more.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I think our time is up. So I'll leave it to you to wrap it up. It's a
All
promise.
right. So, like we said today, we talked basically on Azure. Like, we also mentioned what are the replication strategies Azure has. We talked on file shares. How do you protect your storage accounts, and how do you make your data stored in like your file share available for people to connect with, even without signing into your storage account, right? So these are some of the features that the storage account in Azure provides that you can make use of to make life easier for you. So at this point, I say thank you very much and goodbye. See you in our next series coming up next week, Saturday. Please ensure to register and stay tuned with us.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. All right.
Bye
Bye for now.
bye.